Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting of the Hampden Board of Selectmen, a joint meeting with the Wilbraham Board as well. July 31st, 2023. Let's begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We're meeting down in the Board of Selectmen office, and we have some terrific guests with us tonight. I'd like to welcome the Wilbraham Board, the Select Board, which is a change that's coming through this year.
Yes, not
correct?
yet accepted by the Attorney General's office, we don't think, but we're kind of going with it.
You like your chances?
It's going to pass, yeah.
Okay, good.
Do you need to call us to order, Terry?
Yeah, did he give me a script or no?
I think you could just call us to order.
Yeah.
That's what he gave us.
Okay, so in accordance with Mass General Law, Chapter 38, Section 20, and in accordance with Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, I announce that this meeting, the Board of Selectmen, is being recorded by, what is your system? Is yours the go-to? Zoom meeting system, and we don't have our go-to.
No.
And ask if there's anyone else present who is recording the meeting.
Wilbraham Public Access.
You were announced.
Kristen Wilbers, Wilbraham Hampden Times.
Thank you. All right,
And Sarah's just taking notes.
and that is it. Thank you. Okay.
I also will mention that we are broadcasting over Zoom as well as holding it live. We are recording the meeting for later broadcast, and again, Kristen, you're recording, and you're recording for public access.
Wilbraham Public.
Thank you so much. So I'd like our guests to introduce themselves, not that we all don't know who you are.
Hi, I'm Teresa Goodrich. You can call me Terry. I am the chairman of the board for Wilbraham Selectmen.
Sue Bennell, Vice Chair.
Mike Squindo, clerk for the Wilbraham Board.
And welcome to Hampton.
Thank you.
Great. And soon to be joining us, we hope, will be Nick Bro, your town administrator. Long time. So, and I have myself, John Flynn.
Craig Rust.
John Davenport. Bob Markle.
The mayor. And our administrative assistant, Pam Courtney, as well, over in the corner.
You welcomed Mike to Hampden, but remember he came to our event at the cemetery too.
That's true.
He's been here.
I'm sorry.
I've also been to a few of the restaurants in town.
Have you?
I have.
Thank you so much. Scouting for the opposition. All right, great. So, this is kind of, we hosting you here because we attended your meeting in Wilbraham. That had to be 2 years ago, maybe? Was it, Terry, or right at the beginning of COVID
Very
almost? I think,
beginning,
yeah.
Craig and I think when we first started. Yeah.
So, good. Thank you. So I know we are going to have a regional selectmen's meeting, and Bob, the date is late in August, correct?
Yes, I have a calendar. Take a minute to find
Well,
it.
sometime late in August,
Yes.
we're having a regional. I'm not sure who's hosting at this point.
We've offered.
We've offered, and I don't think it's been set yet. But again, is it Ludlow, Munson, Hampden, Wilbraham? Was there anybody else in the mix?
Is East Long Meadow there?
Long Meadow, East Long Meadow, I'm not 100% certain.
Might have been East Long
This is
Meadow
why
as
we
well,
need
'cause I think we were
This
gonna
is
talk
why-
about.
Tuesday, August 29th,
Looks
6:30
like
p.m.
the
Thank
28th,
29th.
29th, yes.
Okay, that'll be interesting.
Do you have a
But again, there are issues that really Hampden and Wilbraham need to discuss between ourselves, and I thought that if we make this more of a common thing, I think it's beneficial to both towns, both communities. So a couple things that we appreciate both of us sharing on the agenda, and I think the biggest thing would be the talk of expanding the regional regional dispatch. So we don't know a lot about it. I know you've met with Tony. I know Tony is online. Is it something you'd like to talk about first, or do you want Tony to give an explanation, or?
I think Tony, it's his forte. Tony, if you're on, you want to give us a little?
Yep, I'm here. I just want to make sure everybody can hear me first.
I can hear you well.
Excellent. I'm in the mountains of Vermont, so it's a little iffy up here, but it looks like I have a good connection.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, it is good. It's a regional dispatch money paid for it. So back
Wow.
back in late 2022, Belchertown approached me and had some questions about regional dispatch. I was able to give them their answers that they were looking for. Then a month or so afterwards, they came back to me and they showed interest in joining the Wilbraham Regional Center. I met with the board, the select board in Wilbraham, I believe in early 2023, but budget, the select board changing, it wasn't the right time to start discussing it. So a couple of weeks ago, I met with the Wilbraham board again, and the town of Belchertown is very interested in being hosted by the Wilbraham Regional Communication Center for their dispatch services. I did reach out to State 911 and I was able to get numbers on how much additional grant funding we would receive. I did some research into their calls for service, their population, etc. They're almost the same as how we dispatch now, so the merge wouldn't be too hard to do. They do have more call volume than Hampden, so I would have to hire a few more people. Again, the state grant, the support incentive grant would cover the additional employees that I would need to hire. I feel that this addition to the regional center would benefit both communities as well as Belchertown very, very much. We'd have 3 dispatchers on, 2 shifts and then 2 on the overnight, or if I modified that to have 3 24 hours a day. The state grant funding would increase. That would be able, we would be able to decrease the budget for my department, in lack of a better term, where taxpayer funds wouldn't be used as much for the dispatch budget. And overall, I think it would be great for all 3 communities to be able to come together and support one another. Wilbraham supporting Hampden, Wilbraham supporting Belchertown, back and forth. I feel that this, having a 3rd community come in, wouldn't be that much of a hard step for us to take on. I was able to, let the step back here. Last year, I was able to get a 3rd dispatch position with a radio, the equipment, and an additional 911 PSAP, all funded by the state, didn't cost the taxpayers of either community anything. So we're at a good point right now to be able to take on a 3rd smaller community with what we have right now, in addition to adding 3 more people. One of those 3 people, I would, one of my full-timers, I would like to promote up to a deputy director, and also the state would pay the salary for myself and the deputy director for 3 more fiscal cycles. So that's another added bonus for both communities.
One question they would have, Tony, is, we're coming down to, gosh, are we almost into year 3 of our grant? So for the 100% funding, would there be an opportunity to restart that funding so that, we're now looking at, Don, is it 50% next year?
Yeah, 50 and then 25.
Or would that,
75.
would we still continue on that thing, that course? Or with a change in the district makeup, would our number change up again? If your grant number is changing.
Yeah, I don't believe the state would add on another 3 years. The town of Belchertown would have the same benefit that Hampden had. The first 3 years would be 100%. 4th year would be 50%, and then the 5th year is 25%. I don't believe there is a parameter where the town of Hampden could get another 3 fiscal years funded by the state, but I will definitely check on that, because maybe that is something that they could do, or extend a 50% for another 2 years or 2 fiscal cycles. But I will check on that, absolutely.
Because it does sound like a bit of a benefit for the district then, because you said the funding is increasing from the state, and then if we don't change, you're actually now getting a pay-in from Hampden as well, which is going to make the funding even better for the host community. My other question would be, do you think this is a trend from the state to, and I heard this from a member of EOPS at the state, that they're looking to get away from two town districts, starting going to 3, 4, 5, town districts. Do you think this is a trend, and would they start looking around for a 4th partner in a year or so as well?
So the state, as a trend, wants to limit the amount of 911 PSAPs in the Commonwealth. The past few years, they've been able to do several PSAPs, 2 PSAPs joining together. to make a regional center. I think in the future, not right now, they would want to have regional centers with 3 or more. They used to have that rule several years ago. They changed it to get additional centers to be able to come together with 2 PSAPs to become a regional center. So we were able to benefit from that. But I think maybe down the road, the state would want 3 to be considered a regional center, or if 2 regional or 2 PSAPs that have a regional center with only 2 PSAPs may get merged into another larger PSAP. But I think the Wilbraham Regional Center right now is in a good position with our 2, and I think we'd be in a better position with the 3.
So, Tony, so now we currently have an intermunicipal agreement with Wilbraham in which there's a board of directors, the fire chiefs and the police chiefs. So we'd have to amend that, right, to have Belchertown have some kind of input on that. And also, we're currently on a fee schedule, but some of the intermunicipal agreements with the larger PSAPs, where there's 3 or 4, they do it different ways. They do it by the number of populations or the number of calls for each town, or percentage wise. Like, you know, Belchertown's about 15,000 and Wilbraham's about 15,000, and we're just 5,000, so we'd be at about 14%, if my math is right, 14 or 15% of the, you know, so if your budget is $600,000, we'd pay 15%, or they base it on either population or on call volume, or on the call volume and population together, and they divide it by 2 and they come up with a percentage. So we would have to negotiate that, I believe, with Belchertown and Wilbraham. There'd have to be a change there.
And that's
Yeah,
kind
so
of, go ahead, that's a great question. I mean, Don brings a good point. What is the thought from the board on the IMA? Is this starting a new one, amending it?
So I think the town of Wilbraham would sign an IMA with the town of Belchertown, and just like they did with the town of Hampden, and then the town of Wilbraham would assess Belchertown a fee to take over their dispatch services. The percentage wise, where Selectman Davenport was talking about, those are regional centers that are special municipalities in the Commonwealth. Those are like Westcom, Holbrook Regional. They're special municipalities. They're not run by a town, but they're their own government. They have HR directors. They have IT people, et cetera, et cetera. So this one, our regional center is like 90 or 85 or 90% of the other regional centers in the Commonwealth. We are hosted by a host community, which is Wilbraham, and any regional center that wants to come on board would sign another intermunicipal agreement to add that community on board. And again, the board of directors would be the police and fire chief for the town of Belchertown as well.
Well, we would all have to agree that we'd have to have some kind of amendment on our IMA for that, to say that we're adding the, I mean, if you'd have to have a board of you couldn't have a board of directors,
Well, I think
Wilbraham and
He's setting it up separate, I think, like you have 2 contract services going out from Wilbraham. Do I take it that way, or?
That's what it sounds to be, and
Right.
I just wanted to back up for a minute, because John, you alluded to the fact that Hampden's gonna begin making a payment directly once the grant expires.
Well,
so
the
for year
the
4.
grant's not expiring,
But
it's
I'm
it
sorry, the
changes
grants,
our
it's
funding.
changing,
yeah.
but I don't believe the net impact in Wilbraham, it's just that 50% of the money will come from the state and through the grant, and 50% will come directly from Hampden. It's not like there's gonna be additional revenue supporting
changes
the
nothing for you.
dispatch. It's a net no impact on Wilbraham's end.
Mhm,
It certainly has an impact on Hampden.
Exactly.
But it certainly, well, you've also.
Well, let me
two
ask you,
years- 3
well,
years for
with
free.
this, it is, but right now, maybe that impact could be lessened. I mean, with increased funding from the state, perhaps the money that we need to contribute to the operation is less. Should that be revisited, because your costs are now compensated greater from the state funding than it would have been when we first started?
I think it's certainly
think-
worth exploring, but I think,
Yeah.
back to your previous point, I believe
I
that
think- I
these
see
would
your
be
point there,
separate
yes, yeah.
intermunicipal agreements.
Mhm.
And the funding, I assume, is paired with costs associated. The state's not gonna give us money for nothing, they're giving us money to reimburse
For
the
the
expense
new-
of adding
Right, but
new
I think
staff
it's still,
and
Tony
things along
did say
those
he's expecting increased funding
lines. Right,
maybe even more than the cost of running Belchertown.
Right.
But I think back to Don's point there, do you see this as a one IMA covering all three communities, or we're keeping this as separate contract services basically to the regional dispatch?
I think through the chair, I think we have to be guided by the state because but from what Tony has indicated so far, it appears that they are separate agreements because as you said, it's individual contracted services.
Yeah, they could be separate
makes sense.
agreements, but they'd have to be one overseeing board, because I don't think Belchertown would be too happy with Hampden and Wilbraham making all the decisions on equipment
Sure.
procurement or something like that, and, or we wouldn't be too happy to have them make the decision, you know, and.
I think ultimately what we need to do is, I mean, we're not reinventing the wheel.
Yeah,
This is
yeah.
across the Commonwealth. So,
Yeah,
I mean, using Tony as, you know, obviously the lead on this, this is his expertise, his forte, and he spent hours and hours and hours on it clearly. I mean, he knows it cold. You know, I think he's going to direct us to the right steps. So they're all good questions that we're all, you know, posing and bringing up. But I think ultimately there's a template. Tony, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't there a template kind of in place where you just kind of plug in the players and you go from there?
Yeah, I can find one. I think the IMA that we have with Hampden was taken from, I believe, part from Aaron Shirley. I think that's where it came from. Yeah, I can check with another regional center that has 3 that brought a third PSAP on after they had 2 PSAPs and see how they did it. I can check with several of them. But yeah, no, I don't. Again, I don't think it's reinventing the wheel. I think it would be 2 different contracts, but there may need to be something added to the Hampden IMA that shows Belchertown coming on. So I don't think it's heavy lifting at all.
Yeah, the point about the governing board though is certainly important, and has to be a way that that's
Yeah,
already been
They must have a
resolved.
way they do it.
Sure.
Tony, I'm not being a gambling man, what are the odds that this is gonna work? Gonna go through?
It'll work 110%. I'm very
Belchertown's on board and.
yes, I didn't approach them. They approached me. I would assume, I believe that they checked other regional centers in the area and they liked how the Wilbraham Regional Communication Center operates. And I have 100% certainty my staff will be able to make this a smooth transition. I'm not saying that there may be some bumps in the road. There's always going to be bumps in the road, but I believe that with our first merge with Hampden, we were able to see all the bumps that are going to be an issue and quell them very quickly. And I think if we take on Belchertown, it won't be there won't be as many bumps in the road that we had. Well, we didn't have many bumps in the road, but I know what to expect when we take on another community now. But Hampden was the first one. I didn't know what to expect.
Clarification on the contract, it states that the communities of Hampden and Wilbraham desire that Wilbraham provide emergency communications and dispatch services for both communities through the Emergency Communications Center. Then later down it says the Emergency Communications Center shall be overseen by the dispatch center hired by Wilbraham in cooperation with the Executive Board of Compromise of representatives from each town. So it sounds like it's gonna need to be rewritten there.
Right. What's your timeline, Terry? Do you think, is this something?
I know that, and Tony can answer this better than I can because he's been in contact with them, but I know that we gave him a go-ahead to talk to them. So Tony, where do you stand now? Have you talked at all with them?
Yep, I spoke with Belchertown last week. They're actually going to come, and I wanted to let everybody know the Belchertown Police and Fire Chief, as well as the town administrator, will be at the regional center on Friday. The new town administrator wanted to see how the operations of the center went, and they're going to look at the letter of attestation, and they're going to sign it on Friday. Again, the letter of attestation is not set in stone. Either community can back out at any time. It's just showing the state that, hey, we're looking at this, you know, you're going to get some more information from us shortly. So,
And Tony, correct me if I'm wrong, but don't they have to do something with their dispatch? Isn't that being pushed by the state? They have to go to a regional center?
So the state is not mandating it at this time. I don't know if I'll see that in my lifetime, but they are providing a single PSAP that goes to a regional center. They're providing the regional center with additional funding, and the main item is that the state pays for the assessment for that single PSAP for the 3 fiscal years. So it's a monetary push, I would say, to have that single PSAP go to another regional PSAP. What the state did last year, or the year before, I don't remember, is they made a mandate now that two single PSAPs cannot merge into a regional PSAP any longer. We were able to get in right before that came into effect by a state 911 without a good reason, and I have not seen any good reason come through for two PSAPs joining one regional or making their own regional center right now. So they like three or more.
Tony, when you first created the regional dispatch and went through all that, you had mentioned back then that the state was favorable in providing grants to both communities ahead of other communities because of the creation of the regional dispatch. Now, taking on a third one, does that kind of jump us in line again? Or, I mean, I know you said grant funding was already good, but does that give us a little bit more of a look for additional funding?
Absolutely. If a regional center takes on another PSAP with a signed IMA, we go to the top of the priority list for the development grant. So if either community needs radio communications upgrades or staffing or computer, electronics, IT, the regional center that brings on another community will be at the top of the priority list. So in essence, if we take on Belchertown, we have everything signed by, I believe the development grant has to be in by March or around there, then we would go to the top of the priority list for any funding, and whatever we ask for within reason would more than likely be approved by the state.
Okay, so I think back to our thing, and then back to my original question, do you think this is a trend that the state's gonna encourage, like the small raindrops merging into large raindrops, though, another incentive, ooh, let's bring a fourth one on, ooh, is this something the state is looking for? I mean, we're not gonna turn to the Berkshires with one center running an entire county, but do you see this as a trend going down the road?
Yes, absolutely. This is definitely a trend. I think in the future, I don't know how much in the future, that there will only be a handful maybe of regional centers. Now that, again, that might not be in my lifetime or anybody's lifetime that works there now, but I think they're definitely trending towards regional centers rather than standalone PSAPs. And in Western Mass, there's really not a lot of standalone PSAPs left as the eastern part of the state. So again, yes, they are trending towards three or more regional centers, PSAPs for a regional center.
Okay.
And Tony, correct me if I'm wrong, I think a lot of that has to do with technology and the equipment. So if you've not been to the dispatch center, you should really go and see just what they can do. It's amazing, but it's all money, and it's constantly being upgraded and updated. And so it's such a costly thing. The days of a phone and someone dialing 911 and you answering just a simple phone, they're long gone. I mean, it is down to, like, plate readers and 911 from a cell phone, and they can triangulate where it came from and what field they're on. I mean, it's amazing. So I went through it. I spent some time with Tony down there, and was just so impressed by it all. I used to dispatch myself years ago, and it is like night and day. Very, very impressive. And I think that's why this trend is, it's only going to get greater. I mean, if you go to California, Tony, isn't there one dispatch for the whole state of California? I read some numbers on it.
That was four, so yeah.
And
It's so huge, yeah.
right, yeah, it just,
What they do is they have a few centers that answer 911 calls, then they push them to dispatch centers. So what they're doing there is they're answering 911 calls and pushing it to the community that then dispatches it. So that's kind of counterproductive, where we take the 911 call and we dispatch it. We do everything right from our center. We don't push it out to the Hampden Police Department to dispatch. That's what the state wants to get towards, have one center dispatch for several different communities. And we've been doing it now we're going on our third fiscal year with Hampden, and I think that it's been great. I think it's been great for both communities, especially for Hampden.
and I've watched it. I've watched them take a call. I watched them take a 911 call, and while you have someone taking the call, they're dispatching the vehicle, because one dispatcher can see it on the screen from the other dispatcher. So it's almost instantaneous. Yeah, it's teamwork, and it's very, very impressive. So
One thing I'd like to say is I'd like to thank Tony for, working with both our fire, police as well. Craig is involved in that, making sure that our equipment is consistent, and that we have, the bands are, all that stuff. X, Y, Z, whatever the
Yeah.
stuff is, yeah.
Ham radio.
Yeah, really, we're not stringing a can anymore, yeah, yeah. So,
Yeah.
And in fact, the state doesn't have to move in this direction, they just simply need to keep doing what they've been doing, which is incentivizing communities to join a PSAP.
Mhm.
And unless that goes away, it's going to continue to be enough of a carrot that I think communities are gonna find it pretty hard to resist.
It is, but I do want to continue to emphasize, the state is just sending our money back to us, you know?
Of course.
Right.
They're not
And
printing it, it's just the money that you and I sent.
we're just
in,
keeping
right?
up with the standard, you know, this
Sure.
is the standard that's set forth, you must have this, you shall have that, and so this is just us all keeping up with the times.
Not your time.
Every day the standards change for 911. This fiscal year, we now have every dispatcher has to have at least 2 hours of mental health training for dealing with 911 callers regarding mental health. So that's just another item on the list that we have to change to better serve every community, which I think is a great idea. And the state, picks up the tab for the training of the dispatchers with our training grant that we get reimbursed for. So, I mean, it's great all around.
Great.
Thanks, Tony.
Thank you, Tony.
Thanks, Tony.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You can go back to whatever you're doing.
Enjoy the Green Mountains.
Yeah, really.
I'm gonna chug some maple syrup.
So next on the thing we talked about, we enjoy the benefit also, but another shared participation, the public health district. And looking for a little update on that, I mean, either from your board or
Doing
Nick,
Veterans
you have
District
something
or
to-
first, or Health District first? Do you want to do?
health
Veterans-
district.
Health District, okay.
Nick, you wanna?
I can just speak a little bit, give some highlights. I think we're now well into our second plus year, more or less, that we've been a group of the four of us, Hampden, Wilbraham, Long Meadow, and Munson. And from our perspective, at least from the office, and I believe I speak on behalf of the board in the sense that generally we think that things have been working out pretty well. We think that having it housed in Long Meadow hasn't been an inconvenience for residents or for our businesses. If there are issues that have come up, I think that our experience has been that they've been addressed rather quickly. We continue to have support from the state with a grant for this fiscal year. I believe we'll be in line for one last fiscal year grant, which for next year. And we think that it's worked out well. The model has worked out well.
I mean, we had the one blip, if you will, the funding issue, and I know it affected in your budget as well. You know, but we had, Finn came to our meeting, I think he gave us a pretty good explanation of what happened in terms of whether it was going out to the market, finding people that were basically qualified people over the budget, which we've all seen happen before. And he assured us it would never happen again, you know.
Till next time.
Well,
So
But
another
again-
unforeseen expense.
there you go. But again, I think,
It's
you know,
worked
from
well.
what we've heard, you know, obviously Jane works very carefully with him, very closely, and I think we're pretty happy,
Yeah, Finn's in
With
here
what's
quite a bit.
happened,
I'm assuming
yeah.
he's down with you guys quite a bit too.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's here regularly, has an office down the hall.
Mhm.
As far as I can tell, we are completely satisfied with the service.
Apple didn't fall far from the tree, well trained by Lori.
Exactly.
I think if he has any questions, I'm sure he gives her a call. So, going forward, but I mean, you do talk about the fact, similar to what we just talked about with the regional dispatch, you know, we have a funding thing coming down the road. Now we're only in year 2 of the public health, so we won't see the impact for another fiscal year.
That's my understanding of where we are. We fully expect to have that. And we've been meeting, we met almost weekly right towards the first 6 months or so that we were getting going. We meet probably quarterly now. When I say we, it's the administrators for each town, along with Finn and staff, and talk about these. But yeah, believe that we're still going to be in line for one more year.
Is there any talk of a possible change after that? I mean, we're looking at, you know, we try and, you know, figure out a couple years down the road impacts with some capital needs. Obviously, we're gonna talk about the dispatch in the following year.
Yeah.
you know.
But
Is
we
there
don't
any
have
talk from the state about extending that? Again, looking to, would they
Never
encourage?
hurts to ask.
Would they encourage expanding the public health? Well, if you took in another town, we could, I don't
Never
know,
hurts
help
to
you
ask.
out.
Right.
That's always but something in the back of our minds, and certainly as budget, we will be asking those questions.
Shaking the tree, looking for something.
Absolutely, because we'll wanna know for sure, and maybe they'll come back and extend it. Yeah, that's absolutely part of what we
Yeah.
will plan to do.
I do see our liaison, our board health person, Jane Beninkowitz on. Jane, is there any question, anything you want to add to the discussion? Basically, just
No.
talk about, we feel the job is going pretty well, and Finn is very responsive for the town of Hampden.
All they have to do is text and Finn's right there responding. He is amazing with the resources he brings to our town. It's really been flawless going from Lori to Finn. He has a wealth of information. If he doesn't know, he will get right back to me. I've had no problems as far as Hampden's Board of Health. He's been amazing to work with.
And same for Wolverhampton.
I think that's been our experience, yes.
Right.
If I
Well-
could just offer an apology for being, showing up late, I had a call that came in
Oh.
I needed to take, so apologies to our hosts and to my board.
Look, Nick, if Governor Healy calls you directly, we understand that happens. Terrific, thank you, Jane. All right, we did have on here, you did bring up on there about the Veterans District. And at one time, that was gonna be something we talked about. We did have a meeting with our current. At this point, it looks like we're gonna stick with the, and correct me if I'm wrong, Don, the Eastern Hampden District, if you will.
Yes.
You know, one thing I will say, in my mind, we very much appreciate the help that Jared has given to residents in Hampden. Because I think that's one thing we all understand, we're here to support our veterans. And whatever resource helps with it, that's what you take. You know, with these veterans officers, there's no pride. They're happy to help because they're giving back to the services these people gave. And I think we appreciate everything that Ken Jeremini is doing right now, Jared has done in the past. Heck, Don Talbot, our Graves officer, et cetera. So I'm not saying it isn't something we wouldn't explore in the future, but right now we are down a path with a new, oh gosh, help me, was it Jason? Jason, a new VSO that will be part of the Eastern Hampden District.
Just to reference Ken, he's going above and beyond, filling that hole
Exactly.
while
Yep.
we were still searching, so.
Mhm.
He's doing a phenomenal
So
job.
we've set it up so there will be hours in the town hall for veterans to come here and meet with the new VSO.
Excellent.
So that's where we are with that.
Okay.
Okay. Alrighty then. Gosh, is there any other regional thing that concerns Hampden or Wolverhampton?
Occasionally.
Sports? Maybe it's Park and Rec.
It was interesting to read through the agreement, and Nick was good enough to drop it on our floor. It's been, oh, I don't know, probably something like 8 or 9 years since I revisited the
Sure.
regional agreement with the district. I went through and made a bunch of highlights, so I think certainly there's things we need to talk about. And last year's budget experience was notable. How about we go with that? We'll go with notable.
It was a little more convoluted than I can recall, having lived through a few of them. That was probably the most, and Sue, you sat through quite a
30
few.
years between
Right.
FinCom and.
No. And, but I think it comes down to one word, and I think after all the dust settled, everyone said communication. Whether it was between our board, your board, the FinCom, the advisory, the budget subcommittee, which I think caught a little flack on that type of thing. Hey, I know it seems like, oh my gosh, you're talking about it so early. We've lived it. It's never too early. And the hard thing, you say it's never too early, but when, and Donna's seen this and Craig as well, when you're waiting for the state to come back with that number, you've done all the early work, and then,
Even when they come back with a number, let's be real, they're not giving it to us.
Right, and then here we are, what, a month after the budget year started? And we'll assign the budget.
We're working on it.
Yeah,
It's coming.
Right.
It's coming.
Now, I will say, reading today, it does sound pretty encouraging. You know, I
I
was
think
hoping for a
for
little
this-
more
keep
for
your
regional
fingers crossed,
transportation, but
yeah.
90% is pretty good.
Keep your fingers crossed.
As
She hasn't signed it yet,
That's right.
exactly.
as municipalities, we are so much, well, as municipalities that are part of a regional school district,
Mhm.
we're so much less dependent on state revenue, the schools is where that whole burden lies, and for
Mhm.
them to try and, throw the stones or darts at the wall or whatever, and take their best guess of what their level of funding is going to be,
Mhm.
to build a $60+ million budget with, last year's numbers and, everybody's best
Mhm.
projections, is an enormous challenge. So I certainly recognize and understand that they need to be conservative with their projections.
Mhm.
They need to be careful to make sure that they can get through their year, just like we have to
Right.
make sure we have to get through ours. But the needs are great, and I am very hopeful that this year's process will go better.
Obviously, it's something that affects both boards. We know there are some potential changes coming along. We've had a great group from the school, citizens, select board members, working on some options to bring to both towns. To discuss them in detail might not be appropriate because we don't have the school board members here as well. But perhaps we can give a 30,000-foot overview. I know Don was on the committee, I think Terry, you're on it as well. Terry, do you want to give us a little recap of where you are right now with the different plans coming forward?
Well, the superintendent's been having public meetings in town, to meet with, folks and get their input, show them proposals and ideas, and just kind of see what the consensus is. So there's oh gosh, there's so many options.
I think we're down to, are you down to 4
Well,
or
there
5?
were,
Yeah,
so
I
there
remember
were.
you
This
were-
has been a very
God,
lengthy.
like the day with the middle school.
This is-
135 originally we started.
Yeah, this has been a really lengthy process, many meetings
Mhm.
of narrowing it down to what makes the most sense, that,
Right.
just taking the polls within the people that we have had there. We've had, some of the teachers there and admin. We've had a parent group there, I think,
PTO and
right.
special ed.
So we've had some focus groups, if you will, to kind of narrow down some of the choices, because there were so many, I mean, honestly. And so that's what he's doing now, is meeting with the public at these different meetings. I don't have the dates here, but I mean, they were published in the paper, and.
There's letters sent home to parents and stuff too.
And right, there was letters sent home, so people can go in and voice their concerns, what they like, what they don't like, and he's listening and he's documenting it all. And he's very involved, and he needs to come up with a solution for this, and he realizes that. I know people were concerned that it was gonna happen right away, like this fall. It's not going to happen this fall. It's in the works, but it's a very lengthy process. Government, nothing moves fast.
Well,
And school,
something-
I think, even slower.
Well, I mean, especially when, like I said, we're bound by the regional agreement.
Right.
Then you have DESI with an oversight as well.
And I think that's
You know.
one thing that parents either aren't aware of or hear it and they don't fully understand it. That we're a regional district, so Wilbraham can't say do this and Hampden can't say do that. We have to agree, we have to
Right.
cooperate and come up with an agreement, and then we have DESI overseeing everything. So, and I think people don't realize that. It's not a simple cut and dry, the superintendent can do this, boom.
I'd like to commend the committee, or subcommittee, if you will, for doing a good job of reaching out to the public, getting the public's input. And like I say, that's so critical. Donna's kept us up to date at every meeting when you guys had a public forum, when you're looking for the online polling or just calls coming in. Because you don't want somebody coming back and saying, well, I knew nothing about it. Well, my gosh, we did.
There will always be
short
that
of-
one, but.
Short of knocking on your door and telling you about
Yeah.
the meeting, you know.
And honestly, this is much like the whole regional dispatch thing. We're trying to keep up with technology. We're trying to keep up with standards, and these are the standards that are coming down. And so, we have to make some changes. We as a town fiscally have to be responsible to everyone, and we have to make sure our kids get the best education they can. So we
Well,
need to.
How can you say anything different after going through the budget cycle we just went through? You just
Yeah.
saw all this mess.
Yeah,
With the constraints they had, the special ed funding and all those
Yeah.
things.
it's
know,
huge. It's
it is.
a big giant.
Right. And then, so like you said, the timeline and something like that, it's not staring
not
at us this
fast.
fall or something
No,
like that.
no,
Okay.
definitely not this fall. Nope.
Well, I know,
Many moving parts.
When we had that community roundtable, we were presented with what, the 4 options, I believe, of possible scenarios of things that could happen. And, you know, looking through that, it's obviously gonna not make everybody happy. There's gonna be some aspect that somebody's gonna get a lot of pushback. And I reached out to the superintendent because I had some ideas, but I want to present it to both our boards because I think the 2 towns need to be very transparent in what avenue we choose or back, you know, with the school committee. And one of those things looking at is I was proposing traffic studies at the schools that were considered to be closed. The superintendent told me he can't authorize a traffic study within a town because it's out of his purview. So that's where we would come in. I feel, you know, within the schools that are proposed on those 4 options, that, you know, if we in Hampden and you in Wilbraham took the opportunity to investigate traffic studies, traffic patterns, time of day, what does it look like in those areas to help make a better educated decision of, you know, moving forward. There may be things there that we don't even know that are gonna impact, you know, traffic and travel, school dismissal. I mean, we look out here during the day on North Road and it's backed up down Main Street and I'm down around the corner, you know.
Come to
there's
Stony Hill when
tons of
middle school
complaints.
gets out.
Right.
yeah.
So I think if, you know, we're trying to get all data and all aspects to look at the table and make the best decision, that a traffic study would be one of the options we would need to facilitate, you know, on both of our ends.
So is this something that you think the superintendent wants to propose to both towns? I need this data, is there a way you can fund this inside your budgets to provide me with this data?
When I talked to the superintendent about that, he kind of pushed it back on me and said that it's outside of his purview, but he would take whatever data that was presented.
Okay.
The only thing that I can see is that we're gonna do the study, but we don't have a lot of wiggle room with our roads and our traffic patterns and unfortunately. So I mean, I think it's good to get this knowledge, but I just also see it limiting it as to how it's gonna help us.
So you are gonna do a traffic study?
This is the first we've heard of. I've heard
Okay,
of it.
that's what I'm having,
Yeah, that's why I'm presenting it to everybody right
Yeah,
now.
this is the first I've heard of it, but
Oh.
I'm just seeing limitations of that. We're not gonna reconfigure Stony Hill Road. We
Oh, no,
can't,
no, no.
and you're not gonna reconstruct
No,
Main Street.
right, that's why
Right.
we need to have the studies to see, you know, if we're talking about closing school A and school B, you know, traffic-wise, which one is the more viable option to facilitate arrivals and dismissals?
Sure.
You know, which one's gonna cause more congestion in the town, which one's gonna cause more public safety concerns? You know, those are the types of data, not reconfiguring streets, not looking to put a rotary in.
Yeah.
You know, we're looking to get the data that says, okay, if this happens, this is gonna be the outfall. Okay, if this happens here, this is the outfall.
But it seems like the right way to do it would be nice to have a formal request from the superintendent to both towns. In part of our process, the strategic committee, we would appreciate the data, and could both towns provide this to us?
If it's something he feels
Right, I mean,
is
you can't just go by
necessary,
word of mouth,
then,
you know,
but I
something
mean, it's
like
gonna
that.
it's not going to be without cost, without expense, so I mean, that's why I think, you know, it should come from, you know, from him to say that this would be helpful,
Right, we
if
help
he
you.
thinks it's helpful.
Sure, yeah.
The other question that I would raise, or point I would make, is that we are mandated to run buses, which mostly run empty. So the best way to control traffic congestion would be to put your kid on the bus. And I know that there are challenges around that for lots and lots of parents, but it's.
Can't mandate somebody put a child.
Of
in
course
the
you
bus.
can't, of course you can't. However, it certainly would be a more cost-effective way of managing the school budget, because, not cost-effective, that's the wrong word, but we are incurring on an annual basis, an expense that is extraordinary, which we had to take on when we regionalized. And they have done a slightly better job, an improving job of giving us reimbursement for those costs. But, you know, to see all those buses running empty and kids being driven and dropped off and driven and dropped off
I
and
think
picked up.
proximity to schools too would also affect bus routes and travel times with students. You know, for instance, you know, a student is traveling 45 minutes and a parent can drop them off in 5 because the school is completely on the opposite side of both communities, then they're not gonna take the bus. So, location to a school and proximity to the population is also a key factor. So that's, goes along with the traffic study.
I'll ask you personally, because I mean, you live near the school. If your son was on the bus, how long would he be on the bus?
So we can walk in 5 minutes, or he'd be on the bus for 45.
Right.
In one direction and shorter in the other? Is that what normally happens? Because my son took the bus to Minichog and I'm a couple of miles away.
Yeah, so they would pick him up from my house, go past the school to pick up other students, and then drop them off after the fact. On the way home, it'd be in reverse order.
So,
I think that's how it was working.
okay, my historical experience was that you had a really long run on one end and then a shorter one on the other.
And I've seen where sometimes afternoon runs very different than the morning runs too.
Sure.
They base them on traffic patterns and students too. And my mother used to drive for the bus too, so she could tell me that the morning route was always different than the afternoon route.
So definitely something, they have to consider.
Transportation is
something like that.
definitely
Transportation is very difficult.
But
we get so many complaints from the general public because of the traffic lines
Yeah.
around the schools. I'm sure you're seeing the same
yes,
in Wilbraham.
absolutely.
Yeah, so.
And yet, as Terry said, we're not gonna be able to change the roads or.
I don't think that's what the idea of a traffic study is for. though.
True,
No.
so I guess.
It's about basing the data about the outcome of what happens. It's not about recreating the wheel.
Yes, and the most recent one I was familiar with was when we were talking about reconfiguring the intersection at North Main and Maple with the Boston Road, when the state's coming in to do that. And there was some lovely work done, and then we had to, I think we asked the study to be redone, because they had done it at times that it made sense conceptually, but didn't make sense in terms of the actual traffic at that location.
Maybe I was not explaining myself properly. There's companies that believe, data services that just provide traffic counts and traffic studies.
Exactly.
I'm not looking to redevelop an area.
I'm sorry, my point was not that the information wouldn't be useful, but that how you run that information, that you may have a better memory of this. And I guess I would be curious, because we have a traffic safety committee. Do you guys have something similar in
We
town?
don't have traffic.
Well, there you go, except at the school, down at the Main Street. Is this something we could pass to them, or do maybe it makes the most sense for us to come to the agreement that it would be an appropriate thing to have the school district request of the towns, because there's willingness to consider getting it done in order to have more data?
I think that's the first place to start anyhow, but we can't do it on a whim. We need something formal. And if that's something, at your next planning meeting, that might be something you might encourage the superintendent to do.
Well, that's cool.
We can put the bug in his ear, and
There you
you're
go.
always welcome to come too. And
We were looking for a fourth meeting, weren't we? So this
Together
is,
with Don's Poland house.
Well, there'll be time when we're funding that for the special town meeting in the fall as well, if we need.
True, I mean, is this a big chunk of cash, the traffic study?
We'd probably get paid through grants if we really tried to.
yeah, come on, Bob,
We have the casino mitigation fund, which may actually pay for that because we're right on the pathway.
if it's on the road, if it's
Yeah.
on that road, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there could be some casino funds, I don't know, could be probably $10,000-$20,000 or so, depending on how much.
Yeah, your casino money now, we had to limit, to the pattern we showed that led to the casino. Is yours restricted the same way? You can't, really?
That's 'cause
And we
they-
should all have talked to
I'm
Long Meadow.
surprised.
What's-
Board of
We're
Community.
surrounding community, we're designated as a
Okay.
surrounding community.
Even though you're further away than us. From the town, the center. of the
Don't get,
casino.
don't. It was an interesting session when we were there, very, How does Hampden know?
One other thing I will go ahead and just throw
Go ahead.
another log on the fire was the question of modifying the regional agreement in terms of evaluating dispersion of costs. And that is something that frankly, I mean, going back to when I was on FinCom and Doug and Carol were still on advisory, we lost Carol, that's tragic. But Doug had brought up.
Carol just resigned.
Carol resigned.
We didn't lose Carol.
Carol retired from the advisory committee. But Doug had been bringing up an evaluation of the process by which the budget was divvied up. And I was pleased to hear, just in this last year or so, that they're actually moving to look at it and so forth. So I don't know where that goes. That's certainly gonna require a whole lot of collaboration, because the way things are now, it's gonna just shift more cost on to you, any change that gets made, and yet we are so constrained by the current formula and the impact it's had on Wilbraham in the last few years, that it's costing budget for the schools, which has an impact on education and quality.
True, but I would say, you know, obviously it's not something we've had a detailed conversation about, or at least I haven't, but obviously a percentage of the cost based on the percentage of the students seems pretty fair. But I think the focus right now on looking at the overall operation of the district in terms of utilization of buildings seems to be a higher priority, because you could do more savings, more efficiencies with that than perhaps by changing the formula. You could change the formula, but still lose percentages in operation without affecting the other. And like I say, I commend the work that the study committee, strategic planning committee is doing on this. Because the elephant in the room, but my gosh, it needed to be talked about. Just like we did about 7 years ago, nobody wanted to hear it. So.
Well, the litigation settlement says a couple of things. One is that we have a strategic plan which has been done. The other thing is that the towns engage in a collaborative effort to amend the agreement. And some of the things on that are that one of the things that specifically cites is look at town borders for the utilization of the schools, to language concerning transfers, and a process for calculating the assessments under the regional school district, and also a comprehensive view of other items in the thing. The only concern I have about if we go forward with an amendment to the agreement to change the utilization of the schools. Let's say, for instance, 8th grade goes to Minnetonka or whatever, or however it comes out, or 6th grade, 6th, 7th goes to Wilbraham Middle School. And then we're coming to Hampden and saying, we want you to give you more money. I think it's gonna be a difficult sell to say, we're asking you to do this and pay more. So I don't know how you work that
Certainly a
out.
good point.
But again,
And to Don's point there, I think the outcome of the reutilization is gonna have a determining factor of how things get shifted around and rewritten if needed.
I mean, clearly we have to do something with the utilization of the building.
Yeah.
right.
I mean, Green Meadows has, what, 4 6th graders, no 7th graders, and 2 8th graders next
7
year.
total enrolled for next year.
7 total enrolled next year,
Yeah.
so it just doesn't make sense, you know?
They're
And
certainly
then you
not
got
doing
schools
that.
that are overcrowded, and we got an empty school, so, you know. That's gotta be resolved, and hopefully
Yes.
resolved by town meeting, but I don't know if you can go to town meeting and say, we're gonna change, your kids are gonna go over here now, either way, from Wilbraham to Hampden, or from Hampden to Wilbraham, and you're gonna pay more money.
And like I said, with the state involvement, this is not something you can do in a month. You know?
No, this is a
This is a
huge
2-year
process,
process.
Yeah.
huge.
Right.
So many
I do have a
moving.
question for you guys, because it was brought to us, it just kind of and maybe it was a roundtable with the schools. Yes, it was when we were with we were at the schools, that whole question of, do we try and take one swing at modifying the regional agreement, or do we take 2?
Right.
And having been through it last time, I'm very much on the fence. I agree with you that like incremental change in some ways may be more manageable and easier and more palatable to move. But the idea of doing that twice is a little bit concerning for me.
Yeah. Again, I don't know if we're
The only
getting too deep,
saving- the only
hold on a second, I don't know if we're getting too deep into the weeds again. It's the type of
Okay.
thing where
Very
without
good.
the school committee here involved in it, you know, we're looking at the 30,000-foot thing.
We're selectmen, we don't need them.
Well, and this is only
Strike that
from
last
our
comment.
perspective, right? Yeah, this is only from our perspective, and
I know,
obviously everything
yeah.
has to play
But the type
nicely.
of thing, you know, like you said, last time we did the multiple change type thing, what did we learn from that? Was it information? Was it whatever? You look at, like I say, the work that Terry and Don and the committee have done, you know, you can't fault that they haven't beat the bushes on everything at this point. You know, you started with 100+ different scenarios and you're down to the best 4 or 5, you feel. And it'd be hard to argue with it. Even Craig has said, you know, everything has a good merit to it and everything has a downside. You're not gonna find a solution that makes everybody happy. you know, and if you did, they would've done it before. So,
Going back to your point, the litigation settlement does say that one school has to stay in Hampden. So that may be a opportunity to say, you know, yes, Green Meadows is probably gonna stay open, or Thornton, you know, Green Meadows is gonna stay open, so maybe you can do, but I'm of the mind that, incremental is the, you know.
Just curious.
And I think, in all honesty, I do think that when they closed Thornton Burgess, and I want everyone to understand that I was on the school committee when when we had our separate school committee here, and I was opposed to the regionalization, and I was opposed to the closing of the school, but in the end, it wasn't the end of the world either. You know, because the population has changed, and the demographics changed, and the assessments, you know, the money changed, right? So, you know, you have to think about what's the best educational thing at this point, when you have 7 kids over there in middle school. It's
When you're
just,
supposed to get to move through specials,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah.
get to dip in
I can
and
tell
out
you
of
that's
things.
lacking right now,
right.
just from experience.
There's no way it couldn't be, right? I mean, yeah.
But
The school
one of the
committee
things,
doesn't-
one of the things we did, we toured every school. We went
school.
into every single school, every
Every
nook,
room,
every
every
cranny,
closet.
every closet. And when I say that, we went into every closet. We saw, you know, there's teachers working in Harry Potter's bedroom, you know, underneath the stairway, the closet, you know. So I mean, they've gotten very creative with space in the schools. And Green Meadows, beautiful school, beautiful facility, and definitely has room for more kids.
And I
So,
think-
you know,
and
we
I
saw
think-
that. Yes, we saw that very, very easily.
and the one big thing I learned was that just because there's a room, doesn't mean you can put 25 kids in there.
Right.
Because the special needs and types of things like that, they have to have
Right.
special accommodation, and it changes how much a room can
Some will
accommodate.
have one-to-one.
Some have one-to-one,
Yeah.
some have
Another thing
special air conditioning and stuff. in there.
Another thing that the public needs education on, because let's face it, if you don't have a special needs child, you're not aware of all the things that those students need and what the teachers need to help them the best way possible. And all the restrictions that go with that. Kids need to have a temperature controlled room. Now, someone may scoff at that. That may mean whether or not that child can go to school and succeed because they're in that room, in that temperature environment. So, I mean, it's things like that that I think a lot of people don't have that awareness of. They just don't know. And it's not their fault. It doesn't make them wrong or anything. It's education of the public onto all the requirements. And again, I go back to, we're a regional system. We have to work together. We can't just snap our fingers and do it because a parent wants us to.
Right.
You know, so I can't stress that enough. You know, my kids are done. They've graduated from Minnetonka and moved on. There's a lot of things I had no idea. All the years they went to school.
I
So,
think we learned a lot in strategic planning.
yeah, I think we did. We did.
I think we have to understand, the school committee isn't working in a vacuum. You know, they understand all this stuff, but the decisions they make aren't easy. And because they affect for a while,
Right.
I think they've done a great job making sure they got community and municipal involvement in everything done here. They're not just, you know, oh, we're commanding, it's done. No, looking at all the things. Michael, you've been quiet.
Taking it all in. I guess my initial thought or question would be on the concept of incremental versus all at once. To Sue and Don's point would be, is there a way to incrementally plan and single-handedly implement? You know, that if we plan it out in increments, we have to get through a utilization plan in order to understand a funding plan, but take it all to the regional agreement at one time.
I don't know if you were referring to, okay, say, oh, let's bring the 8th grade plan together, and then the following year we'll talk about something different, or was that your thought, or just?
My thought was really just in terms of the reconfiguration piece
Yeah,
of it. I
right.
think that is something that has to kind of be done in one swoop, even if it doesn't take place all at the same time. And then the question about opening up the regional agreement is not an easy thing, and that's why, because I believe the formula needs attention one way or another. You know, there are other places, there are other formulas in place, and my biggest concern is not not around the additional financial burden on Wilbraham, but about the constraints of our ability to fund that. And when you've got years, we've now had a couple years in a row, where the simple change in population consumed all of the money that we had planned to put forward as an increase for the schools. So then you're struggling of trying to make cuts, and you guys have been through this too, you know, and there've been years when Hampden had more money, you know, has had constraints, we've both been on both sides of that equation. But because of the shift in population that we've seen over the last number of years, I mean, it was 75-25 for, I don't know, how many decades, right? All but the last, not even a whole decade.
What is it right now?
80-20, or even 19,
70,
I think.
78,
Yeah.
79%. And so every percent is X $100,000. And
It's a
when,
huge change.
you know what your budget's like, right? You just, then you're struggling to try and get any kind of an increase to bring forward to the schools, and we know they need it. I mean, we haven't had an override for the schools in, I think we're at year 15, and the state's formula was not designed for communities like ours to go that long without putting additional money into the schools.
So we have two different aspects of the regional agreement then, the funding aspect and the town line or
Lack thereof.
reconfiguration,
lack
yeah.
thereof,
Yeah.
or, you know, where does the agreement start? You know, pre-K, middle school.
And I understand that this is, you know, we're not gonna come to an agreement. I just was curious where your thinking was. I wanted to kind of share some of mine.
I think of the 4 plans, they're all gonna require some type of modification. But depending on which plan is chosen depends on which modification. So I don't know which way is better to go, incremental or all at once, because we don't know what the clear plan is yet.
Well, and I think that we have to look at the biggest picture of all. Is there a detriment to just changing the agreement all at once and being done? You know, I mean, we're all in this for the long haul.
Right.
You know, I mean, when you look at the big picture. So I think we need to just look at that simple fact, you know. And as Sue said, it's not easy to open it up and change it, and we have to have Desi's blessing on the whole thing. So, you know.
Looking at overall enrollment, it looks like it's off about 300 from where it was.
Right.
And
You know,
are you
where-
plugging in, what kind of assumptions are there for the future of enrollment? Is it,
Well, they've been
I think
talking-
Aaron shared those numbers, right, Don?
Right.
yeah,
We're at that base now, we're trending up over the next, what,
Right,
5 years?
you know, the big gap was, so to speak, matriculating out of the system now, and you're
Yeah.
starting to see the younger grades growing again.
Fill out.
Right.
and they're looking at, have the balances from choice in, choice out changed? Or homeschooling?
Homeschooling has definitely gone up. That I am aware of. I don't have any data specifically, but I do remember that question was raised a while ago.
I believe out-of-town enrollment has gone up too. Out-of-district enrollment has gone up.
Yeah, choice out.
Yeah.
And he's in his projections have projected enrollment increases to fit into the elementary school and the middle school. Because that was asked that if you put the 8th grade in Minichog, how's that gonna affect it? He said there's plenty of room for any growth that comes along.
Right.
I think all that's available through public record and birth statistics, you know, in the communities, you know, the
Right.
youth that's coming up.
I think the whole question, like you say, the current 8th grade goes in, but the 8th grade that's in 1st grade right now, will it fit?
Will still
at
fit.
Minichog?
And-
That's the whole question.
And you got a
And those
little
are the
bit of
facts you need to
flux.
put forward, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
all right, I know you guys have, your board has things you want to address during this meeting as well. So I want to leave
Just a
you
couple
time
of
for
little
that.
amendments.
Yes, it's page 2, there's a motion for the board's consideration and some documents. If I could just bring up one thing sort of relative, I've spoken with the board about potential for a special town meeting, and I've put out sort of an all-call with my department heads with the school district, and the school district did get back to me and said that there had been talk during the budget cycle with Wilbraham about potentially
things.
adding capital things on, so that's something I'll be speaking with the board more about on Monday night, but we're looking at dates in October.
Right, we did set a date of October 30th for ours. We did discuss, this came up at our last meeting with Doug Boyd, that he had said there was a tentative commitment that during the whole budget cycle, we would address the capital needs at the special town meeting with, potentially with free cash. And I think we have it on our tentative list of warrant articles at this point. I don't think of the original 5 things they had, I think Doug said they were done just 2 pretty much at this point, right? You know, if it was the railing or was it the,
I think the railings were, I don't know what the other thing
I
is.
can't remember. So I think it was only 2 of the issues they were gonna bring forward in the fall.
Oh, okay, all right.
But I know we had questions, we had concerns that,
There were
one of the things
questions.
they were talking about, why isn't this in your normal budget? It was a computer thing, like, why isn't this part of
The
just,
IT budget or
right, your IT budget, things like that. So,
normal operating expenses that should be.
so we're looking at, we're October 30th
So
at this point.
at this point for us, with the moderator and the clerk, the 16th and the 30th are available, depending on the board's schedule.
You know, we always have to be concerned with the posting, 2-week posting requirement, so you have the Columbus Day holiday, you know, to make sure.
Well, and we've
you know,
got 45 days to
That's
get the
why-
warrant out or any, right?
And that's why we do the
Yeah.
30th, because it keeps that
So,
free.
I would think it would be very important to make sure that the schools were in touch with Hampton, both advisory and FinCom in preparation. I
We'd
mean,
like
they
to be
often don't
consistent, yeah.
don't
with your
start
capital
meeting
things, yeah.
this early or that as early as would be required by that, so that'll be important
I
to.
hate to say
Yeah,
it, but
really.
just back to that point we talked about earlier, we finished the special town meeting. I think, just like you said, we should be starting the budget cycle for the following year right then, because we really were behind the 8 ball in this whole discussion. It definitely seemed like it. Where we
Yeah.
weren't all, it was
Yeah,
a
I
bit
mean,
of a surprise to
it-
some of our boards, like, what? We're this far off, it just, it
And
was.
from, I mean, I know Doug and Carol went to all those
Mhm.
subcommittee meetings, so did Mark Ducey and Pete Dufresne, and what they reported back to us was that the number that was voted was never mentioned in those meetings.
Mhm.
And so everybody was blindsided. And that, I mean, we need to be negotiating, they need to be talking about it. We've never had a time when the town's placeholder in the budget was immutable. You know, I mean, of course, it's a negotiation process. We go back to the days when we would sit around with Dr. G and we'd actually have the kind of session we ended up with
In my,
3 weeks before town meeting.
in my years, I've never seen a second assessment letter. That was a first to me in 19 years. So
Yeah.
I've had the reduced assessment before a fall town meeting.
Yeah.
But never a second one coming before the town meeting
It
with a
was,
number
it
change.
it was not to be repeated.
Right.
There we go.
So,
Hopefully it was a
Right.
one-time thing.
a learning experience, great. Yeah. So you guys have it, I mean, we're gonna learn.
So we just have a consent agenda, a few consent
Yes.
agenda items.
Move to approve the consent agenda as requested, including the waiver of fees for nonprofit entities and contingent upon final approval from appropriate departments, complete application documents, and receipt of application fees.
Second.
If I could just offer
Sure.
discussion. Consent agenda, these are several votes related to the summer concert series concert that was not able to be held last Thursday. My understanding is that the cultural council is still working on whether or not they could proceed this Thursday evening. These votes would allow for the permits to be changed in the event that they are going to hold the concert.
So we were seconded, all those in favor?
Aye.
Oh, we certainly appreciate the one allowing the Ferrandino Maple from Hampden to. So
Yes,
we'll
absolutely.
say we're in favor of that one as well.
There's nothing like maple coffee.
Come over the line and try it too.
Oh, boy. That is a terrific off market, thank you. So, is there anything else the board wants to discuss while we have them captive? I mean, visiting.
Anything else for us? I don't
I
think so.
don't think so. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, great, thank you. Oh, boy, that was short and sweet and nice.
Shall we say it together? Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you for your hospitality.